Thank you so much, Mark. Brilliant. So much in there. And I suspect the chat is going crazy with comments and thoughts. I have Morecambe and Wise and Chanel and your brother-in-law all on my mind now. So much in there. What I want to do now is do something a little different. And we have I think a bit of a speed challenge for us all here, and also a practicality challenge, right? So we've got, I think, hundreds, thousands of people sitting out there, many of whom are, I'm sure, on the chat, being positive keyboard warriors, sharing their thoughts, thinking what's going on, but most of whom are, marketers, so probably knackered, got obese inboxes, so probably distracted, and what they need is help. They need practical examples. We need to talk about what do we actually do. So across this next session, we've got 3 brilliant brains, a very short period of time, and I would like us to get as much practical, tangible tips and takeaways out of this as we can. And let's make this a pacey panel to keep everybody going, and a practical one. So I've got here with me, as well as Mark and I on the sofa here, we've got the fantastic Rebecca Dibb-Simkin, who is the Chief Product and Marketing Officer for Octopus Energy, an incredible challenger brand that has gone from nothing to, I think, a triple unicorn, one of the fastest growing brands around. So we really want to talk about what does that look like and how does it feel. And I've got the fab Clare Hutchinson here, who is the Chief Strategy Officer for VCCP, which I think is the #1 agency in terms of billings at the moment in the UK. And let's talk about some of the brands you've worked with, and particularly about Cadbury's. So we're taking a newer brand and an older brand. We're talking about differentiation. We're talking about the stories and the tips and the ideas. Let's see how many punchy headlines we can fit in, how many thoughts we can have. So Rebecca, I want to start with you. Octopus has been a fascinating story to watch, and you've been there since the start. Small brand now, massive brand, #2 in the marketplace, and achieving incredible things. Has differentiation played a role for you? What have you done when it comes to differentiation?
We have a saying at Octopus that you can put lipstick on a pig, but it's still a fucking pig. And for us, and for me, very specific differentiation is around, do I know what differentiation is? I don't know. I just know how I've built my brand, and I've built my brand by obsessing over the product and the experience and what it is that you give to customers. My favourite phrase is Peter Drucker's "The aim of marketing is to make selling superfluous," that you create something so magical that people just want to take it from you, and that's my job, is to create whatever product is. For me is everything that a consumer takes from you, whether that is a tariff or a piece of hardware in my market, or whether that's an experience they have with your customer service team. Everything is about that brilliant product, and obsessing there. And we're fucking obsessive at Octopus, obsessive about customers. We all look after customers every day. Every day I will go into our systems and email and reply to emails from customers, just as a normal person who's helping to kind of understand what's going on. So, it's that product and customer absolute obsession. A couple of the things that we do as well differently. We have no walls between functions. So, it's not someone else's job. Looking after customers is not someone else's job. Building tech is not someone else's job. Everybody's job is everything to build this business. That's absolutely critical as well. And then I think the final thing is iterating at speed. So trying new things really bloody quickly, right? So whether that's, I'm going to change that copy in that email because I think I just dealt with that customer who didn't really understand it, so I can make it better. Whether that's getting new creative out, whether that's getting press release out, everything is try it, speed, move faster, see what works. If it doesn't work, move on, do something else.
Obviously love the need for speed, and it's so important for everybody to get that, and the ability of marketers is definitely an issue. The customer obsession and the product focus, what I love about that, of course, is classic marketing. We end up talking about communications so often when it comes to that. So Mark, anything to add? Listening to that and talking about challenges?
I think it's spot on, obviously. I think, thank God we don't talk about advertising so much. The product is the most important P. And we get to that point where the promotional P becomes 70-80% of our discourse, and it's 5-6% of our job. And if you ever look at proper touch points data, advertising rarely comes up in the top 10. It is the price, it is the service, it is the product functionality. So I think that's a key point. And then having into functionality, if you look at we built all these marketing scales in the 90s. What is truly good market orientation? And one of the top 3 or 4 drivers in all the companies that were market oriented was this interoperability of different departments, so the customer information and flow could move right around the organization. And so I think it illustrates 2 of the most important points.
And that is one of the challenges for marketing leaders. It's the only function where you really do have to join up all the departments all the time and have that relationship. Yeah. I've forgotten the Peter Drucker quote, let's absolutely make selling superfluous. It's a great call to action. So slightly, in theory, is it easier when you're coming in as a new challenger brand to something to be differentiated if you've got a heritage brand? So Clare, Cadbury's is fascinating, been around for so long. You've been on a fascinating journey with them. Tell us where differentiation came into it for you.
So for us, differentiation is fundamental, is key, because ultimately our success has been about being always different, but always the same. It started with finding our truth, our difference, and really driving it through consistently through every single touch point. And the story started in an exciting, but also kind of slightly daunting place, because 2017, Cadbury lost 2 million households buying Cadbury Dairy Milk in the UK. So that was a real issue. And of course, we had that problem of, the brilliant gorilla that failed to have a great second album. It became very, very clear to us we needed to understand why that was. And the platform of joy, there was some great work done by Kantar, a little bit of a plug, that showed quite clearly that the brand, was completely incongruous, or was not congruent with this platform of joy. Because when you looked under the surface, how people really felt about Cadbury was it was warm, it was family, it was comfort, it was like having a hug from your nan. It wasn't this hyperbolic world of sort of saturation, colour, and sort of, bombasticness. So what we decided to do was to find that truth. And we went back to Bourneville. The team from VCCP went literally back to the boardroom at Bourneville. And we learned about, Richard, George and John Cadbury, and the fact that they didn't just build a factory, they built it in a garden with hospitals and with schools, all of those things for their workers. And they didn't just put a glass in a bar of Cadbury Dairy Milk, they put a glass and a half. And this product truth at the heart of our brand and our business is not only what made us different, it also made us distinctive, because that asset of the glass and a half had 100 years of equity behind it. So it was bringing those 2 things together to really drive the power of the brand forwards. But for us, it wasn't just about, those 2 things. It was then understanding how could we be really different in the marketplace. And at that time, the rest of the category was very hyperbolic, a bit like gorilla. Everyone got a bit excited and thought, chocolate is fun. It's full of sugar. It's sugar rush. But ultimately, we decided, if we talked about our own generosity, that was probably the least generous thing we could do. So we focused on generosity in the world, which at that time was very, very much needed. The world was in a really difficult place. And that for us was the important thing. It was about being really distinctively quiet and differentiatingly quiet in the marketplace at the time. So we told small stories, a girl in a corner shop with a shopkeeper, a bar of chocolate and a unicorn. And it was that quietness in the way that we told that story that really helped it to stand out. And we've stuck with that consistently. We've had stories on buses about a guy in a fence, most recently a girl in a garage, but it is that, always different, but always the same.
So interesting, isn't it? Hearing the story behind how you get to something like that. And there's a lot in there. I know there are a number of people who struggle with the whole heritage brand responsibility and keeping a brand fresh and up to date. I know I remember talking to Pete Markey about Boots and it not being a heritage brand, but also just playing on the history. And also Sarah Benison from Nationwide talks about how if you've got an old brand, actually the future's the same for everybody and all your competitors, but there's something in the past to bring out. And there's something in there that you talk about, which is plays to Mark's points about the emotional side of it and those insights. Mark, I noticed Clare glanced at you when she was telling this story, probably because I think this is...
So very handsome.
That's what it is. I think it possibly might be because I believe you've written a couple of articles about Cadbury's. Want to change your mind?
I'm a big fan, I'm a big fan. Not of the gorilla. I think what VCCP have done is among the great case studies, not of just now, but of the last sort of 50 years. The challenge, not so much for the agency, but for the client, is whether they'll hang on to it for the next 20 years. I think they should, but they usually don't. So what you've got is what I would call campaign ability. You've got not just a brilliant idea, but you've got something that, it doesn't take anything away from the creative teams, but the ads are half written for the next 20 years. Keep them contemporary. Don't think that the consumer's getting sick of this. Play some of the old ads again. I'm trying to get the John West tuna ad back in Australia for John West in Australia. I'm like, why the fuck wouldn't you play it? It's better than anything you've done in the last 25 years. Most people have forgotten about it outside the industry. I think it's the great work. And it sounds easy once you hear the story, but for me, it's the tightness of they called it brand purpose, that's fine, but it's basically a one-word position, which is generosity. And it comes back to what I'm talking about, which is you cannot have 75 words in a pie chart across 12 slides and expect any form of differentiation. It's just mush. You have to be choiceful.
I love that bit earlier because it doesn't matter what you call it, and we end up arguing about
Totally does.
everything else. It's the choice, and I think there's this courage of consistency. I mean, I suspect for you, Rebecca, the point you're at now, done so much with Octopus Energy. It's become this incredibly successful brand. What happens now for you in terms of keeping the differentiation going?
Oh, yeah, it's hard, right? It's fucking hard to grow a brand. It's hard to grow a brand, especially in a market where you've got someone like British Gas who've been around since the beginning of time. And I always think about brands as kind of, with new brands, you have to, brands like a shelf in someone's brain, right? You have to have the shelf there, then you can put stuff on it. But if the shelf's not there, then you can't put anything on it. And people don't remember it, right? And I think, when you're a new brand, you try and make your shelf a bit distinctive because that's how you kind of stand out. So you might make it purple and you put jeweled nails in it or something like that. And then you come to a point you think, actually, that's great, that shelf, but now I need to make it a big structured shelf and I need it to be able to sit alongside the encyclopedic tomes at the top. And it's kind of how do you then bridge that gap? So there's stuff that we could do when we were really small, which are hardest to do now. When we've never put anything out there isn't, honest and decent and fair, but you could be a bit cheeky with some of your creative.
More risky, yeah.
And then you get bigger and it's like we've got 5 million customers now and I've got a lot of legal teams looking at just making sure that everything that we're doing is right, from external, not ours, right? So it's kind of, it's how do you keep the core elements that kept you innovative and nimble and differentiated when you were small, when you were big. And I think the way that we do that is, it doesn't work for all brands. We do all our creative in-house. So, my team is full of designers and copywriters. We do all the media in-house. We even do our media buying directly. Now, we can do that because I'm ex-agency. I was at Ogilvy and our head of customer experience is a creative director and my CEO was a marketer at P&G. Not many businesses. I always feel really bad because I always go, we don't use agencies. Most brands should use agencies. They're fucking brilliant. We're unusual. And we've basically got an agency in the business because we've got 3 of the best agency people ever of all time. But, it's kind of keeping what elements it was core to innovation and speed and creativity and being close to customers and being able, that is scalable, right? When I was at conferences and we had 50,000 customers, people will go, well, you've got great service now, but how's it scale? I mean, how does looking after people not scale? Like, it just doesn't make sense in any way. And as long as the top people and those people that they train beneath them to kind of come up and think in the same way are still doing it, it is totally applicable at different sizes. You just have to think differently.
And if you follow the Kantar data, that's exactly the story. I mean, one of their best charts, and I've loved it for a couple of years now, is that thing I showed at the end of my session, which is Kantar demonstrating very nicely across many, many brands that when Octopus was a young brand, it could be and had to be very differentiated. It had to take an enemy. It had to break rules, and it was easier to break rules. As you get to maturity and size, because you've been so successful, paradoxically, in differentiation, that the emphasis does move to distinctiveness and just looking like Octopus and reminding people what you are and maintaining what you've got becomes a greater focus. Again, not a binary switch, but that balance can change. And I think the data on that is very powerful. When you open up to, you can have both. The next level is, but they don't have to be 50-50.
That's really interesting. So the Malcolm and Wise side of it, as you are trying to grow up without slowing up, making sure that you're playing that is fascinating. The point you make there, Rebecca, about what you're doing around customer obsession and customer service, you're building that brand from inside out as well, making sure it works inside the organisation. Does that become more challenging as you have become global? How are you dealing with that?
Yeah, so it's very interesting now. We're now in 15 countries, not all of them retail energy, but a lot of them. And the way that we scale is we find brilliant small businesses in the energy sector who have a license, who can regulate to operate, and we buy them, entrepreneurial teams, and then we switch them to our brand and they grow. And it's kind of been a double-edged sword because you've got some brilliant people who can grow businesses, right? But they also want to grow the businesses their way. So sometimes you have some, I've had to have some big fights going, guys, core brand guidelines, you can't make the fucking octopus green. Like, I don't care whether Finnish people, and I use Finnish because we're not in Finland, so it's not one of our teams, say that they don't understand a pink octopus and it has to be green. Like, I don't care. So you get that kind of a lot of, well, in our culture and in our language, this doesn't work and that doesn't work. And I've been trying to, it's funny, when I worked at Ogilvy, actually, I was responsible for global adaptations of I think it was Kodak then, and the creative came out of New York and went to different countries. There was a piece of creative that came out of New York, and when I sent it to Ukraine, they said, this creative doesn't work. Like, the line doesn't work in Ukrainian, right? You need to change it. And I said, it can't change. It has to be the way it was. And there were two press outs, one with a penguin and one with a car. I'm probably getting into trouble for saying this. I've never seen it before. The penguin in a car. And I sent the copy off to Ukraine, and they sent it back to me. And I was kind of doing a bit of Google because I don't speak Ukrainian. And suddenly realised that the copy was the wrong way around. Right? And they'd laid it out. So they'd put the car copy with the penguin image and the penguin copy with the car image. Obviously, they knew what they were doing, but they were making the point that it's so pointless, this creative coming out of New York. You so don't get us that we have literally made it meaningless, right? This was a very long time ago, by the way. Anyone from Ogilvy watching this is like 15 years ago. Everyone's moved on. But it was kind of, so I've always been really fearful of insisting that countries do it the UK way because of that local need. But then again, it's like, you can't make the fucking octopus green. So it's that balance is hard. We're learning.
It's a moment, though, isn't it? When you start Octopus, there's a small enough group that literally by being in the room, you kind of get what the intent is. And I worked with Benefit Cosmetics in San Francisco for a very long time, from sort of relatively small to gigantic, And I always remember they moved into Korea, which was their first international market. And the CEO, Jean-Andre, who's a brilliant CEO, went over there and found to his horror that they were painting plates. That was their kind of opening ceremony. He's like, well, it's got nothing to do with Benefit. But then he realized he hadn't explained to any of the Koreans what Benefit was. Because when you're a smaller brand at the start, it is a more organic thing. And it's almost a shame. At some point, you have to position so your agency partners get it. But also, when you move beyond 2 countries and 1,000 people, you have to make it artificial, or it dissipates. And there's always a little disappointment when you have to do that. But there's also a business imperative as well. Do you know what I mean? And the great test is briefing. Most clients can't brief it into their agencies. And it's no matter how good your agency is, if you can't explain the position or what it is that you want, and the target and the objectives, there won't be good work coming out of it.
Which is why, going back to the absolutely simplicity and making it simple and as simple as possible, because then everybody can get it and you can communicate it there as well. But it comes up all the time in marketing society conversations, the horror stories and the tension of that global local thing. Someone told me last week about an American company and the being told the other day that it was important that they translated it into European. Which was classic. I would love to tell you.
But it's fun, there's a really important, I remember there's only a couple of companies that have done it well in my experience, right? And the simplest insight is you cannot put someone in charge of global if they haven't been in a market. And as obvious as that sounds, we do it again and again. British companies, and I worked in a Japanese company for 12 years, a medical company. We went through 7 or 8 different Americans, all lovely, beautiful, smart people. Not one of them ever got their ass out to Japan.
Yeah.
And you watch this Japanese team who didn't change sit through another discussion with someone that couldn't even be bothered to get on a plane and just come and walk around because they don't know local markets and they don't know how important that is. And there's a handful of companies that get that. You do not run a global brand until your ass has been in a regional market and you've served your time. And that's half the battle we have with this global local thing. The global guys don't have it. I mean, the local teams complain and they play games. But the global guys that get it need the experience of local, and it's not happening.
You've got to get out there. You've got to be in the market. You can see what's going on, feel it, and it's down to the people. So how did it work for Cadbury? I mean, that's an interesting one.
So Cadbury is obviously a big global business.
We've got your ad in Australia.
Oh, we have.
It's done badly in Australia, but it still works. Yeah.
So for us, Mondelez has a global model, which whilst it's a hideous portmanteau, terrible word, actually is very, very effective and works really well for us because it's that combination of strategic, strong global governance, which is what VCCP does, but also cultural resonance and cultural relevance in the market. So we work really closely with the markets. We also work with Ogilvy, and we travel out to the markets. To your point, you get involved, you understand, but you also understand different levels of market maturity, and that's really fundamental for us. We've got, chocolate as a category, market like Indonesia, completely new. Chocolate, they're kind of just being introduced to it for the first time, let alone Cadbury. And in the UK, you've got 200 years. Next year is our 200th anniversary. Very exciting. Lots of good things coming. But, those two things are fundamentally different. So it's having that sort of strength of governance and understanding and being really, really clear that, generosity has to be there. It has to be all the way through. Seasons are a really good example of that for us. So, Christmas and Easter for the UK and Australia, we've done Worldwide Hyde, we've done Secret Santa, super successful. And that's all about finding the generosity in the season because Christmas and Easter are generous seasons. They're times for chocolate. So we have to be disruptive with generosity in those seasons. But equally, you go to somewhere like India and you focus on Diwali, and they created a fantastic campaign, won Titanium at Cannes. So it's using the same sort of approach, same strategy, same difference, but doing it in a culturally resonant way.
But it's working out the non-negotiables, so not a green octopus, keeping
strategy, generosity.
And then giving people that framework, but then they've got some freedom within it.
I think, Sophie, the long and the short of it very often is a good segue for global local too. If the global team can do the product development and the brand positioning overall and the distinctive assets, but allow the local teams to activate it and do tactical work locally, it's not a perfect transposition. But it's such, the first thing I ever say to big global clients is it's not you. Everyone has a problem with this. No one has fixed this matrix. If you ever talk to an experienced market, they go, well, it must just work great because the global team talks to the country teams like, no, everyone fucking hates each other, So no one's fixed it. But I think that long-short split is also quite helpful in saying short-term activations, local segments, local targeting, but global brand guidance. And there's a fit there somewhere,
It's a nice framework, isn't it? And taking it in there for people. So I have an undercover mission for the four of us now, right? We are going to go in, we're going to find a brand, and a brand, I was about to say brand X. That's obviously not the brand we're going to work on. We'll find a brand and destroy it completely as quickly as possible. What would be the main three things you would do to make sure it's the opposite of breakthrough, to make sure that differentiation is screwed up left, right and centre? Claire, what would you do?
So I would go in and I would encourage them to do their research with people who don't want to buy their brand. This is something I see time and time again. It drives me insane. I had to have multiple fights with various clients about this.
My wife doesn't
Everybody wants to persuade people that if they don't like their brand, then if I talk to you, I'm going to somehow learn how I'm going to persuade you. It's like trying to persuade a 3-year-old to eat lettuce. It's just not going to happen. So, for us, or for me personally, if you go in and you try and find the answer from people who don't want what you're selling, then that's a sure way to screw up. Because ultimately, speak to the evangelists, speak to people, go back to that emotion, people who love your brand, understand your brand, and really kind of understand the truth from that, rather than speaking to people who actually couldn't be bothered.
Excellent tactic. Love it. Rebecca, what are you going to do?
I would insist they embark on a very long planning cycle with a roadmap of at least 2 years, carefully budgeted. I would insist that they built a brand pyramid, possibly a donut,
I think.
and a very keyhole, very clear messaging matrix and message track for all eventualities. And I'd encourage my CEO to do what he likes in his spare team and not behave himself at all.
And so the challenge of the CEO when it comes to a brand.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I'm liking this. You're going to slow everything, write that down and give people pain. What the biggest thing you do?
Well, I think you'd have a marketing team devoted exclusively to advertising. No influence on product development, pricing or distribution choices. Not that they were in charge of it, but no input to it. So we'd end up with an underpriced, poorly designed product in the wrong places. And with a great little ad campaign, but that's it. And, it's not going to help.
Perfect. Brands destroyed and loving this. We can totally do this. I want to come back to the question of simplicity, but also language. And actually, I've just remembered, we were just talking about the global local thing. The other thing someone told me earlier as well is the importance of that language in that positioning, purpose, whatever it is at the start. They had collaboration in their British brand, which of course, when they went to France, actually had totally different meaning.
Especially for Chanel,
Yeah, let's get back onto Chanel. The challenge of language and the challenge of understanding. We've talked a lot today about differentiation. Mark's shared some of his definitions. We've tried to explain it to people, but I know how confusing it still is for people. You know, the inevitable and almost ironic confusion between differentiation and distinctiveness and where it happens. I just want us to try and use in our own words a little bit of what does it mean when we've seen it work with brands? What does differentiation at its best mean? I'm looking at you, Claire. When you've worked with Cadbury's and we've worked with other things, how would you define it?
I think it's pretty much what I said before, which is like always do what others aren't doing and do it consistently. So find your truth and just make sure that, you know, be different but always be the same is kind of how we see it.
Be different but always be the same. That courage to stand out but also stand firm and have it there as well. You've done it, Mark, but I'm going to make you say it again for everybody. If they get nothing else out of this morning's brilliance and thoughts and food for thought, what does differentiation really bloody mean?
So it doesn't mean uniqueness, and it doesn't mean something that you own, because I think that's thrown marketers off for a generation. It's making choices on the 2 or 3 things you will relatively win at. And then back to this point, celebrating the fact that means sometimes you do shit that other brands not only wouldn't do, but question how it's possible you can do that. That's always a good signal. If you do something and the sister brands or competitor brands say, oh, you can't do that, as if there's some kind of rule book, and it's on those 2 or 3 things you've decided to relatively win on, that for me is that sweet spot of being consistent to your position, but disruptive to the category. And I love that idea of those 2 things happening at the same time. That's when you get excited and you think the brand's moving, you know?
Because you've got that tension. What are examples of where people have done something where everyone else has said, you know?
I mean, the classic ones are in wine and champagne. It's, you know, if you look back on the history of wine, Dom Perignon is vintage only, right? So when they don't have a good year, they don't make champagne. People miss that point. They're, on average, 6 years out of 10, they don't make anything. The rest of the industry at the time said, we can't do that. You have to have a non-vintage as well. And that created the myth of Dom Perignon and its real scarcity. Do you know what I mean? So when you see things like that, you know, Madame Clicquot made rosé, invented the idea of rosé, and it's a very feminine, strong thing to do that no one else would have done. And then these things everyone else copies later, but that's the moment where a brand did something that only that brand would have done. So it's always nice looking at history. What becomes industry standards was set by these crazy, you can't do that moves. You know what I mean? Yeah. Krug's a good example. Krug will pretty much charge the same price for non-vintage as vintage, which, you know, breaks every rule in the book. But if you know Krug, everything is literally perfect. So their point is, why would we sell our non-vintage for less than our vintage? Because they're literally 100-point wines. They're all the same price. You know what I mean? Again, the rest of the industry said, you have to have a price difference. So I love it when brands look into their soul and go, this is who we are. And then they just go, fuck that. We're going this way. I know you don't do that. That's fine. But we're not part of this industry, you know? We're not a wine, we're champagne. Yeah. We're Dom Perignon, I'll do it this way.
Fighting a whole different battlefield, and it's good to bring up the pricing point as well and make sure we've got that. I'm just going to, because you've mentioned Veuve Clicquot, I'm just going to go back to something, because I love the story of Veuve Clicquot. She was such an incredible entrepreneur.
And nobody knows it's the widow in England,
no,
you know?
No, and she went and she had, I mean, talk about our economic challenges. You know, she had, war on, all these things.
Yeah, she was literally invaded by the Cossacks at the start, right? That's a real crisis, right? You think we've had trouble, right?
And what she did, a whole category. So I'm going to see if I can remember the quote exactly, but she was brilliant. So she wrote to her granddaughter on her deathbed and said, the world is in perpetual motion. We must use our intelligence and go before others. And invent invent the stories of tomorrow, or invent the things of tomorrow, something about focus on that. And then her final line in the letter, which I think's great for building on your point, her point to her granddaughter was very simply, act with audacity. I think audacity is a great word.
Zest de folie is what they call it at Clico. So there's a little bit of with Clico. There's a great picture of Audrey Hepburn having a cheeseburger with a glass of Clico, and it's that little zest de folie, which is it's all very classy until you see the cheeseburger, and it's that little squiggle at the end where they have fun. Audacious fun, you know, they take a little bet and they do something crazy, and it's what makes Clico beautiful, you know. I would argue it's a sexist point, but I'd argue it's not something a male founder would have done. There's a little bit of feminine audacity that I just think it's there in the brand, do you know what I mean? And it doesn't mean it's only for women. Men who like women like Clico, it's very noticeable. They don't go for, you know what I mean, Cristal. Men that love women really enjoy Clico too. That femininity is attractive to everyone. You know?
Love it. The cheekiness and the cheeseburger, it's brilliant. So audacity, Rebecca, when you're talking about differentiation to people and you're thinking about what's happening with Octopus, I mean, smashing it in terms of the data, is there audacity there? How would you define?
Well, I hope so. I mean, I think, you know, it's about understanding that you can't put lipstick on a pig. Going back to that core truth again, obviously, unless you're selling pigs and they look better with lipstick. So I'm not insulting pigs here, but, you know, understanding what the core truths of your brand are, what you want it to stand for, and also what you're good at. So I talked about, you know, we do all our creative in-house because we've got that experience to be able to do it brilliantly. I'm not saying someone else did it. It might not work well for someone else. You've got to understand. I think we haven't talked about team much here, actually, the people that you work with and understanding the brilliance of the people you work with. And I moved from my very safe middle management, you know, FTSE 100 job to go and join a startup, when people went, why the fuck are you doing another one of those energy suppliers? And I met the founder and I'm like, this guy's got the vision and the capability and the team around him to make this happen. So I think you trust the people you work with, understand their strengths.
And hanging on to them, right? Well, now you've got them.
Hanging on to them. You collect, for your career, you collect people like Jules, don't you? And you keep them in a little box. You know, I might come back to you later. So always be nice, because you'll always need someone later, and spot those brilliant people, because even 10 years later, actually the lady who does the voiceover of the Octopus Energy ads, Susan Bookbinder, was very lovely to me when I was in my previous job. She did some media training for me, and I always remembered she was lovely. And when I needed a favour, when we did our first TV on Octopus and we had no budget, I gave her a call and was like, Susan, do you fancy giving us a hand? She did. She still does them. She is the voice of Octopus Energy because she was talented and nice.
And it's the Cadbury story too, right? They look at that Cadbury team. Since 2017, there's a team there that haven't turned over that much. And we don't talk about it enough. Quality of team. And then it was the Tesco story, right? For a long time. They had the same people and they didn't move. Yeah. And I think it's the unspoken variable in big brand success. You know what I mean? We do not mention it enough.
The consistency again, but this time with consistency of the right people over time. And that's part of building a long-term legacy, isn't it? And being around. We have run out of time for this conversation. It went so quickly. I hope it was as pacey as we'd intended it to be. So many great examples there. There's definitely something, isn't there, about sharing the stories. I remember Eleanor Roosevelt used to say, you know, we must learn from other people's mistakes because life is too short to make them ourselves. And definitely what we've had there, a couple of stories there from personal experience. Thank you, Rebecca and Claire, and Mark's perspectives on all of that as well, which hopefully have given us all some tips and some takeaways so that we can be as breakthrough as possible, that we can understand the power of differentiation. It's been great having the conversation here today, and I think we are done. So thank you so much.